Hello, and welcome back to this special interstitial episode of Terminus. I am the black metal guy, aka the ethics of bookstore crowd killing.
And I am Hyper Shaman, aka ass to mouth resuscitation.
How is that the name of an album?
No, that just literally popped into my head like 10 seconds ago.
I mean,
it was kind of an intrusive thought.
Right. It just popped in. So that's a Curb Your Enthusiasm sketch. The ass to mouth. Okay, that's pretty good. So the death metal guy couldn't make it. This is because he has been fending off hurricanes left and right.
I think he's one of those guys on the coast, like firing his gun at the hurricane as it comes.
Yeah, for sure. I
think it works.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I think if they hadn't been shooting, it would have been a Category 6.
Exactly.
Yeah. But, if they think Hurricane Milton was bad, they got to look out for Hurricane Dante. I had to. Anyway,
I bet you did.
So we've been, so we just put out that interview with Cricinagneth today, and Hyper Shaman and I have been had this in the works for a minute. So the theme for today is me catching up on records that everyone has been telling me to listen to for half a year.
I mean, I already forgot when it actually came out. One of our albums, basically like most everyone in the Terminus Discord except you, like out of the intended audience for the album, you were like the only person who hadn't heard it yet.
Right. Okay, so we'll get into that in a minute. I mean, other than that, I guess it's time to shill. If you are listening to this episode and you are not yet subscribed on our YouTube, please do, whether you're a regular YouTube user or someone who has an old account like buttfart777 that you haven't used in like 20 years. We would still appreciate the subscription. It helps boost our signal. Comment whether you have something insightful to say or a question, or you just want to say Gorgoroth. It helps with the algorithm. You can follow me on Instagram, and you can follow the Death Metal Guy's sort of skeleton account on Facebook. If you have been consumed by the spiral of Lovecraftian madness and you actually want to give us your money, you can subscribe to us on Patreon. $3 and up gets you access to our old bonus episodes, and $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Discord, where they talk about the records that I should have been listening to for the whole year.
Yeah, I'm trying to scroll here, see if there was any major developments recently, but right now it's just a lot of some good chit chat, some good shit posting. Oh, and I guess they're talking about Creed.
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, and under the cold light of an October almost full moon, we are off with our first review of the night. This is Auld Ridge's For Death and Glory, To the Gods I Cry. This is self-released, but also on Dark Adversary Productions. And this is one that I have been sleeping on for a while. People in the Terminus co-prosperity sphere have been mentioning Auld Ridge to me for quite a while. And some people have asked if I would eventually cover them, and I was like, when the EP that sort of preceded this record came out, and I was like, yes, we'll get to it. But yeah, I hadn't heard this record until a couple weeks ago. Hyper Shaman, you've been on this for quite a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, back in 2021 with, well, it's not his first album. He had an album in 2020 that I hadn't heard, but the first album, 2021, Consanguineous Tales of Bloodshed and Treachery, I was pretty into. So I've been following, along with this gentleman who we may mention is, he goes by O.W.G.A, but that's the Hermetic Order of Ytene, also Albionic Hermeticism. Cool guy, really cool music. And in this new one, I mean, I was expecting more like high quality stuff, in the vein of the last three that he put out, but this one just slapped me. It was this is black metal.
Yeah,
this is the black metal.
This is it. Yeah, I mean, we might as well get that part out of the way. I mean, this is a masterpiece of a record, and honestly, like a kind of thing that I've probably wanted to hear since I was a kid. Like, I mean, it somehow checks. I mean, not somehow. We with skill and good songwriting, but it checks all of the boxes of like, this is all the cool stuff you want to hear in black metal, but it never sounds like, oh, he's doing the black metal thing. He's doing this thing to make it sound like classic albums. It still feels like his own original thing. It's just, just like really well put together. It's craftsmanship. It's so a couple thoughts. Yeah, this really is what we call full spectrum black metal on the show. That is like bands from recent years who are trying to recapture who are, rather than drawing out one strand of the original black metal idea, try to have something. French. Right, exactly. Like the French and the Finns focus on a particular kind of melodic Gorgoroth riffing, right? Or, the bands that are really influenced by Graveland and whatnot are picking out these certain pagan folky parts or whatever, right? The comprehensive nature of the early Emperor or early Gorgoroth or Immortal stuff or even Mayhem with this wide range of moods and textures and, you hear different kinds of riffs that go on to found entire genres, right? So bands who are trying to reclaim the fullness of the origin and reactivate that, we could talk about as full spectrum black metal, but we usually link that term to bands that are really invested in the Norwegian sound. Norwegian and maybe Swedish, the really ambitious Swedish bands. And Auld Ridge has that in spades in terms of how he approaches songwriting and many riff ideas, but the overall feel of the record is sort of modern pagan black metal, right? Where you can also get, I mean, there's a ton of Graveland influence here in terms of just sort of jangling guitars and certain kinds of folkish riffs. There's unfiltered, there's direct folk melody, and that gets at another thing, which is his earlier stuff for Auld Ridge and for Albionic Hermeticism, correct me if I'm wrong, but seemed a little more sort of weird and rarefied.
I mean, the Albionic Hermeticism for sure is definitely like a little more weird, a little more quirky. The earlier Auld Ridge stuff, it was all I think it was always heading in this direction. It's just the earlier stuff was a bit more eclectic and sometimes a little more disjointed. It didn't have as much of the connective tissue that this album has.
I went back to Consanguineous, and it's a great record, but that seemed to me like a more straightforward exercise in very sinister Norwegian black metal. Extremely accomplished. I mean, this guy composes like at the level of like Welkin's Emperor or something, and does it as a one-man project. But it was like an eerie symphonic black metal. And the last Albionic Hermeticism record, that was the first one of theirs I've really liked. Some people pointed out to me it's this space opera about explorers going into the heart of the universe and finding the devil.
I did not know. I was not. I mean, I guess looking at the song titles that makes sense, but I guess I was not familiar with the concept there, huh?
Right, but it's basically like hard-edged Norwegian black metal with the progressive tendencies of the mid-90s, you know? Some of the later Emperor kind of Arcturus vibe. It's spacey, right. But it's not like space metal. But this is much more... There seems to be like a shift towards more direct Aeolian folk melody here, and more sort of stern heavy metal riffing. This is there were heavy and aggressive passages on the old stuff, but this is very in your face roiling aggression.
This one keeps up the energy.
Yeah, and sort of clearly defined melodic lines. This is a very manly album.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at the album cover, that's a guy that gets work done. It's out there with a what is it? That's not even at first. When I first saw the album, I thought it was like a machete, but I think it's like an axe or a shovel.
I think it's a primitive.
Something.
I think it's a glaive. I think it's...
more like...
What?
Yeah, I mean, regardless, he's got some sort of either weapon or peasant tool turned weapon.
It seems like a peasant... It's like a peasant tool converted into a weapon. Yeah. It seems like a primitive glaive.
Stanced up in front of his thatched roof hovel. He is ready to, like, put in an honest day's toil.
It must be noted that the thatched roof cottage is pretty big.
Yeah,
there's a lot of thatch on that roof.
Yeah, it's closer to a hall than a cottage.
Right. This is a man who provides for his family and his family's families. Yeah. Yeah.
This is a man who reproduces. He fucks.
Right. Tilling the good earth. So yeah, this is very cool. How else to characterize it overall? There's a cool sort of the sort of spiritual or ideological dimension of this is interesting. I would align Auld Ridge and the Hermetic Order of Ytene and all that. It seems like there are two sides of like very English or British black metal, right? Yeah. There's the one side that is very exclusively Saxon focused and has sort of
very heroic,
bold, bright, heavy metal
light
melodies.
Side.
Yes, very
like heroic, light, forefather, solstice, winter filleth.
Yep.
Yeah,
like you get it.
We like the Thanes are marching to war for
right.
For our god
Tyr.
or gods.
Like, Solstice is all about Tyr. They're one of the only bands that focuses on Tyr. But, like, Tyr, the lawful sovereign god, right?
Exactly.
And Tyr and Thor, the stout, the friend of the stout everyman, right? And so that's one dimension. And then the other dimension is this stuff around Inverse Solar Requiem and Hermetic Order and Dark Adversary, which is more... It feels extremely pagan, but it's the lawless and terrible sovereign, right? It's very Odinic, and in the full
go on.
Oh no, in the sense where it feels almost left-hand path, but not in the kind of reactive butthurt way of like anti-cosmic paganism or whatever, right?
No.
Yeah. It's just a very dark, it focuses on the most dark and cryptic and nocturnal. Yeah, dark doesn't even do justice, right? The nocturnal storm is the focus.
Yeah, so like when you guys were talking about that Ingeluther Henavogyan album, the what I latched onto a lot with that was the idea that like we're kind of looking backwards at like an earlier English society, and this isn't about the people who live in the village. This is about that guy that lives on the edge of civilization as they know it. And people aren't really sure what he does out there, but they're a little weary about it.
Right. He is
that kind of guy.
Yes, it's the sort of being on the inside. It's someone who's part of the society, but is also on the outside of it. It's which is the status of the sorcerer, the berserker, or the aristocrat. Yeah,
these connote sort of liminal roles, transitory roles.
Right. So so like basically it's very Odinic, and it accesses all the parts of Odin that early Christians immediately saw and were like, oh, this guy's the devil.
Well, yeah, that's what I start my notes with, the frenzy and wood. You know, very just like that spirit, that violent spirit.
Right. The specific Wad, Odin's rage, right?
Yeah.
Yes, this record has that in spades for sure. And what was the other thing I was going to say? The other thing that's significant about this wing of the scene is that they're clearly, they like the Saxons, but they're also on either side of them, right? On this record, Auld Ridge is the first song, Blood in the Tides, is from a Saxon perspective, but the last two songs are focused on the pre-Saxon Britons, the Celts who had settled the British Isles before the Saxons, and who were represented, say, by King Arthur.
Is the second to last one? I know Henman looks Old English.
That does look Old English, but it says the last two songs explore fictionalized accounts of a Celtic and pre-Roman. I'm just going.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it just just because it's Old English doesn't mean necessarily is saying good things about the Saxons.
Celtic and pre-Roman Britain. Basically, like, rather than where the right-hand path sort of solar, diurnal kind of English black metal sound is very focused on the Saxon experience. These guys are like, yeah, Saxons are cool, but we're also interested in the Celts, who the Saxons would, especially the Christianizing Saxons especially, would have perceived as kind of a dark remnant of ancient Britain. And at the same time, in the Norse invaders, who the Saxons were not very fond of, right? So track 2 on this record is Fyrir Dauda och Dyrd vid Enska Bruna, is from the perspective of one of the last Norse armies fighting at Stamford Bridge.
Famously, I mean, it's an apocryphal tale, I think, but famously a bridge held by a single berserker who was then stabbed to death from below the bridge, but it's a pretty cool story.
I think the song is probably from his perspective, is what I would guess. Which is, so
why not?
Yeah, so you get that on the Inverse Solar Requiem stuff has that too. On the one hand, there's all this sort of Celtic Cornish stuff, right? Stuff in this ancient Brittonic language, and then there's also all this sort of Nordic Germanic mysticism in it.
Up until the Norman conquest, England was this violent, shifting pot of peoples. I mean, the Saxons were the Vikings before before they were Saxons. Basically, they came by sea and killed and pillaged, and it's really fast. I mean, I could go on. I love that period between Rome and the Norman conquest.
Right, and this record is just all about basically the roiling violence of ethnogenesis during that period.
Yeah. It's all of that. I can't get enough of this.
Yeah, it's the making of a nation told from all perspectives, each of them having a legitimacy. Yeah, very cool. So, without further ado, let's make you listen to it, listeners. And I mean, honestly, Hyper Shaman, you whenever you want to go more in depth on the history, we can.
I want to make sure we get to some samples first.
Yeah. This one was basically made for us. So your first sample.
Like, do we? So we want to just start with the cool part.
I think we gotta start with the cool part because
we'll start with the cool part.
The record starts with the cool part, and if we don't talk about it now, we'll be talking around it for 20 minutes.
Yeah, like it would be dramatic to be like, oh, we'll end it with the coolest part, but like I do just kind of want to listen to it now. So this is like basically like the last almost 2 minutes off of the first song, Blood in the Tides. And as we said, it's I guess start out, this is a song that hinges around a really cool riff, but we'll go into why it's a lot more than just a riff later that kind of gets a couple permutations and then comes back at the end, and it's the cool part. Okay, so yeah, like, that was the cool part. Like, it's obviously, like, would have an even greater effect if you start the album, you're hearing that riff, you're hearing it go through, it cuts to some other stuff, you get a cool permutation halfway through, and, you know, as cliche as it might sound, like, the song is really a journey, but it is. It goes to all these different places, and then you come back home to that big riff, and it just hits. And he's doing the counterpoint, the counter melodies, the background, drops into that double kick, and then if all of that wasn't enough to make you think this is the coolest thing ever, he then just has to drop, like, the hardest line of the year. I will always fight for my tribe. Like, oh, jeez.
So that is absolutely the hardest line of the year. And the riff is written for the line in a crazy way.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a minute, but let's talk more about it musically first.
Yeah.
So as much time as we took sort of distinguishing this guy's wing of the scene from the sort of right-hand path Saxon English black metal scene, this is, that riff is like the most complicated Forefather riff ever. Right?
Yeah,
I think,
I wasn't even thinking, and I listened to a lot of Forefather. I wasn't even thinking about Forefather with this album, maybe because it was like, oh, that would be too obvious, right? And maybe I just figured, well, no, it's a different kind of thing. He's not really doing the same thing that Forefather does, but now that you mention it and you brought it up a couple times, like, yeah, I hear it.
I think part of what makes this album so good is he's got in the background this sort of he's built his chops doing this much more sort of cryptic and elusive music and more sinister music, and now he's like engaging with this other tradition, which is like the Forefather solstice folk riffing, and it comes out like in a very different way.
Oh yeah, so, yeah. He's got his own twist on it, and then I we mentioned, I brought up not that it necessarily sounds anything like it or the other bands like it, but I brought up Vehemence because of that, the two guitar counter melody, the counterpoint. Like, this is probably, other than listening to Vehemence, this is the only other time that I've heard an album and I was like, holy crap, this guy's like composing scores with his guitar work.
Yeah, the Vehemence melodies also have that sense of just completeness to them. And even though they're quite complex, every part is essential. They're never sort of wanky. We're talking especially about the riffs, we're talking about the huge riffs on Par la Adversary, basically.
Yeah, and the reason it feels so complete is because it's done right. These are two different parts that they're not just playing parallel, they're not crossing over each other, they're meshing. Because they're doing the counterpoint in the way you're supposed to do it. They're not necessarily like, following the rules of music theory. Not necessarily just that. It's just they know how to make the melodies work together.
Well, here, the counter melody almost works like a round, right? It's like the same rhythmically. So it's pretty much the same melody that enters like halfway through the original riff. Is that that sounds about right?
Yeah, it's like a slightly augmented version.
It's a variation, but it cuts in. It cuts in not in unison with the riff, but with the first melody, but halfway through it, like a folk song or a baroque, a baroque fugue or whatever.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and that's what if we feel like moving forward to the sacred word, that's where hearing all that sort of stuff, Gorgoroth. True. Like I, and we'll touch back on that for sure in a later sample, but that's the band I see thrown around a lot online in reference to this, and yes, it is here in spades. It's not the only thing. But definitely Gorgoroth.
It has the completeness of Under the Sign of Hell, right? I mean, the hugeness and scape and variation. I mean, this is, in a way, I could hear that. This is the pagan black metal Under the Sign of Hell.
And he has like a similar he has a similar sense with his riffing, I think.
Anyway, we'll get into that more. I have two more points about that make both sense to discuss here. I think, honestly, because this moment on the record is so crucial, a lot of the big ideas are just going to come out now, and then we're going to run through some other samples because they're fun to listen to. It's
that's the well, and we as we said, we had to start with this part because you can't. It's the elephant in the room. You can't not start with this part. But it's definitely going to get out our biggest.
So some other things about the structure. What you can hear there is that is a really long melody. Calling it a riff isn't really, it's a manner of speaking. That is a complete melodic passage, and it's composed of multiple phrases. And the phrases, if anything, are very cleanly set off from each other. But they often, they almost cut across each other at certain points, or seem to interrupt the momentum of the previous one. But there's this enormous, inexorable flow from one to the next. It's kind of like powerfully convoluted.
It's angular, but it still feels like the relationship between the phrases feels very angular, cutting back and forth.
You're right, dude. That's why it's so good. It's because he has a sense for flowing folk melody, but he's cut his ears on all this harsh Norwegian stuff. So he introduces an angularity that's not always there, right? And
he's making some lightning riffs. He's going Argento mode.
Yes, it has the lightning quality of the Spite Extreme Wing riff. Yes, that's why. And Gorgoroth, of course, has that angular quality in the riffing.
It's this ability to change the momentum of your riffs, and it's like the shape and the momentum.
Yeah, you change the you change the velocity mid riff.
Yeah, so it's like the da 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 da, like that's all like a steady, smooth way, and then you go da 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 da, like you all of a sudden jumps into this other phrase that feels like a logical progression, but you've lunged with the lunging forward. It's
which
it's
gets
like an attack.
Yes, which gets back to what you were saying about WOD or older. Yeah.
Yeah, the frenzy.
Leaping Odinic frenzy. So it has this to it, and there's also something structurally interesting, is that every one of the songs is built around a passage like this, and
like a main musical theme.
Yes, and they're if anything, they're weirdly self-contained. In another kind of sophisticated symphonic tending black metal, these passages would be kind of like you wouldn't necessarily hear just a minute-long, really sick unit that is clearly the heart of the song. Things would be more sort of interspersed, or there's something about his way of songwriting that's very old school, and it's like it's between old school thrash and death immediacy and this more sort of ambitious way of composing. The only band I can think of that does something like that is Dawn.
Exactly. Dawn will have this is the riff for this song. It's not the only thing here, but it is the riff. And I think a lot of other bands, maybe due to the draw of trying to be, more complex, more I don't know, legitimate, more black metal is the new classical. They may feel like they need to make a motif to just kind of trickle into other parts. But this riff isn't reworked into other riffs in the song. It has its own variations, but it's still this riff.
Yeah, it's like Dawn, like the part you're listening for, it isn't just like a couple riffs you like. It's a minute-long, sort of fully fleshed out chord progression, like Ride the Wings of Pestilence, right?
Yeah. Or even like
Falcula has it, you know.
Yeah. Or the even the shows what I know about Dawn. It's the first.
The Knell in the World.
Knell. Yeah. Where it's not even the main riff in that song, but it's that part where it drops out for. Oh,
you're right. That part is.
Yeah,
dude.
They like.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh my god, it's like the climax, the orgasm of the song. It's saying, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to tie into other phrases and parts of the song while still meshing with them.
That's it. It's because he does. The other stuff is all completely worth listening to, and like you say, he does reference parts of the big melodic passages elsewhere, but he wouldn't have to. Yeah. They're so self-contained. So basically, he's created a kind of really direct and modular song structure. It's like write one enormous barnstorming passage, put it at the beginning of the song, put it at the end of the song, put a variation on it in the middle of the song. In between that, you have all these much shorter things that really are individual riffs and that strongly contrast with one another. And then the game is just how do you get back to the big part?
Yeah, and it builds up a lot of good tension. It builds up a lot of expectation.
Yes, it's a very good way of splitting the difference between basically like, you know, you're using your structural ear for these sort of development or diversion parts, and then you do get this enormous heavy metal kicks payoff, as evidenced by the fucking double bass fill at the end. Double bass
exactly,
fill, like
dropping into the bass.
Yeah,
yeah. Well, and then do we want to listen to another big section?
Yeah. Okay. Let's do another big section. We'll come back to the lyrics at the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's do that. So. Without further ado, this is the big section from track 2, the Vikings Stamford Bridge track, and this is the version of it that happens actually kind of pretty well into the song, midway through the song. I think another way he introduces variation is that like he doesn't always put the big part at the beginning. Basically, where it falls shifts around. This song, it's like he takes fragments of the huge melody. He takes the beginning is like trading fragments of the major passage, which then materializes a good way into the song, which is pretty cool.
But the great thing about this guy is when it hits, you know that it is the big section. Like
for sure.
Like, you can't ignore it.
Right. So we're going to run through the... we're going to run through the second in a pair of verse lines with, you know, some Norse declamation. And then we will get... You'll notice when it's the big riff. I don't know, man. For sheer profusion of incredible melody, that's got to be like that's got to be it.
Yeah, he like I don't get bored when I'm listening to, like, when I listen to music I like. I don't get bored, but sometimes my attention may lapse in certain sections of songs. It doesn't mean that I don't like it. It just means I just sometimes I zone out a little bit. Like, this album doesn't allow me to do that because it's always hitting me with something.
Yeah, man. So,
and it's very impressive.
In terms of that, so the big riff there, I mean, that just feels like Wagner or Karl Orff or something.
It's bombastic.
It is. It's bombastic and severe.
Or severe? What's the? I think it was a literature muse. Storm and Drang. Storm and Stress. It's straight up Storm and Stress there. Yeah.
For sure. It has a. I mean, if it didn't sound so archaic, we would say that's one of the Stuka Dive Bomber riffs. But it has a. It has this swaying feeling to it that's awesome, and you can tell he's written it to the lyrics or vice versa, because this riff feels more Norwegian, right? It feels
it feels a little nautical.
Yeah, it feels nautical. It feels like Toka or like the best Satyricon riffs. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, see, I was wondering, like, I wanted, when I was thinking of, like, man, what kind of, like, reference points do I have for this? I wanted to say Toka, but then I was listening to some of the songs, and I'm like, I don't know if I hear it so much, but I must, when I was thinking about that, I must not been listening to this song in particular, because that one definitely has that, it's, like, nautical and, like, mountainous.
Yes, that's the Toka. Yeah, the Toka riffs are often like less grim. They're often brighter, but they're all nautical and mountainous. Yeah, you're like,
which when what country in Europe is both incredibly maritime and incredibly mountainous? Well, that's Norway.
I mean, if you're sailing down a fjord, your boat is cresting the waves and you're swaying, standing up, and there's mountains on all sides of you. Right.
Yeah, and it's cold. It's windy. It's severe.
Yes. Yeah. So you can what?
Oh, I was just say very awesome.
It is very awesome. And so with that, let's go to obviously we're gonna be the centers of gravity on this record are clearly marked. Oh yeah. Last thing I want to say about it real quick is the way it then erupts into a bunch of different riffs, many of them more like those sort of boisterous forefather riffs. Like, you end up with kind of like noble, wide interval folk melodies at the end of that passage in a way that you would not expect based on the initial thing. It's wild, man. Anyway, this is going to be our survey of like the mid-song development sections, which we've talked about. So the parts that aren't the big riff. This is in the the third of the major tracks. This is Henmain Gotur Hannes et Gweleth. And this is, I think, just the coolest and most eventful development section. You will hear the central passage return in the middle of this, but in a somewhat muted fashion. Basically, when you hear it on the record, there's going to be versions of it that are more in your face. But here we go. had to cut it off there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, like, that, you know, death and glory. Like, Jesus.
Yeah, it's pretty insane.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah, so things to flag there is just like the... I don't know why I'm saying things to flag there. It sounds like I'm doing a fucking PowerPoint. But the important stuff is that the beginning of that section, you get a hint at that kind of notion of the Celtic as the shadowed, concealed, and ancient. You get this sort of creepy glissando Norse-style guitar, right? Almost like an Arcturus riff or something. And then a Carnix over it, or a horn that's being played as if it's a Carnix. I don't know if this guy tracked down a Carnix, but why not?
I mean, you can probably, you could probably make one in your backyard, like the Celts were doing it before they had iron, I'm sure.
Oi, bruv, you got a license for that Carnix? Yeah,
right?
Yeah, local man imprisoned for manufacturing Carnixes in his backyard.
Harassing, taking the Carnix to the football game.
Harassing Rome FC with the Carnix.
Apparently, from contemporary accounts, they were supposed to be pretty terrifying. Like not dissimilar from... they talk about those Aztec death whistles making such like a awful... The Carnix was supposed to make like an awful roaring noise.
So more like a didgeridoo maybe than what our replicas sound
maybe
like.
Even like harsher. I don't... obviously we don't know what it sounded like, but I'm sure someone's recreated one. But they were supposed to be pretty intimidating. The Romans were not fond of them.
Yeah. Well, that was certainly an intimidating Carnix, and it's sort of hidden in the mix in a pretty cool way, and then you get just this sprawling, flowering folk riff that is totally self-contained and just blossoms and then goes away. It's insane. It's just gorgeous. And, some more development stuff. And finally, in the end, we're back. We're at a version of the central passage. The da-da-da-da riff. It's really cool. And then it turns into that sprawling halftime part at the end. Where you can hear maybe, both, you can hear connections to those classic Norwegian bands, but also to stuff like Ildra, a great English band.
Ildra rules.
Ildra is very simple, very just Graveland Bathory, but it has that sense of spaciousness. It sprawls. Anyway, let's go to your last sample.
Yeah, and my last sample, once again, this is kind of... this one isn't so much going into one of the big parts per se. This is, I think, actually towards the beginning of, and I'm gonna try this. Our Cricinagneth an Agen Albannu Tu Telyr.
Yeah.
Some sort of Britannic language, whether it's Cornish or Old Welsh or something. Not sure what it means. And for this one, all I had to say was Gorgoroth. anyways, that was meant to just be a much shorter sample, just getting in that beginning part, and I guess as I was telling the black metal guy during the sample, I lied. There was a big part there. I don't know how I forgot that the big part was there, but it's there. And as I also said, like that, first of all, Gorgoroth. Second of all, it's far too long, far too unwieldy. Not unwieldy. It's not a riff. I can't call that a riff. It's a music. It's like a singular musical idea, but it is not a riff.
Yeah, it's a sequence.
It's, like, that's, like, the best stuff that Dawn does.
Yeah, it actually is like that passage from the middle of Now in the World that you were humming earlier.
Exactly. I mean, that kind of stuff gets me, so hard.
Yeah, like the more sort of pyrotechnic leads. You get that on, this isn't a naming Dawn songs competition, but basically it's a thing that happens on Slaughter Sun a lot. There's
a reason there's a nuclear explosion on the album.
Yeah. So it is, that's astonishingly good. Every time you think you've heard your favorite riff on the record, you hear another one. So I also want to note that I think, like, the reason I brought up the Krig riff was I'm pretty sure I went back to listen to Consanguineous, and I'm pretty sure on that record he does a version of the Krig riff.
I'm sure. I'm certain it's somewhere.
Yeah. Which is fine. That's great. Everyone should do a version. But the do you have anything else you want to highlight about that, or can we go back to the lyrics real quick?
I think now we can go back to the lyrics, because I think that's a good that's a good thing to transition to towards the end of this, because it's like the overall theme of this album is just incredibly cool and very just like coherent and complete. Yeah.
So really, we don't need to get too much into specific lyrics for different tracks. I mean, they're not written. You have to listen for them, but they're audible. I mean, on the Viking track, right, is for death and glory to the gods I cry, beneath my boots, 100 Saxon lives. Ugh. Stuff like that. Basically, the lyrics are all written in the voices of characters. They're not generalizations about the past. They're all in the imagined. He puts on a mask for each track and speaks in an ancient voice, which is very cool. But really, in the same way that the riff on Blood and the Tides just is the riff for the album, I mean, it's just the moment that encapsulates the record. So let's just talk about the lyric. The first version of it is, that you hear earlier in the song is, I will always fight for my tribe and king. He might say kin, but I think he says king.
That one I'm not. It's really hard to tell if he's if he has that ending sound.
But the phrase that really sticks out is simply, I will always fight for my tribe. And he does a clever thing here. This makes sense dramatically, right? It's the voice of a Saxon talking about the Norse coming to his shores with axe in hand and how he'll stand against them. But the line is, in the same way that the melodic sequence is sort of set off and isolated, that vocal line within it is isolated for a reason, and it's written to stand out. And hearing that, that line obviously speaks to the current situation in England. Yes, it is it sort of erupts out of the dramatic. It erupts out of the story into the present. And
it's hard not to associate it.
And it is a bold and defiant statement. And this record is full of those. basically lines that are spoken by characters in the past that are also obviously about today. And this is really important because a lot of the times when a metal band says, oh, we write about, history, like historical events and characters, it leaves history inert, right? It's just a theme or just...
Yeah, they often do it kind of, I think... I mean, okay, maybe not intentionally, but a lot of times it ends up feeling like, we're able to talk about cool things like war and violence and power, but it's okay because we're talking about like 500 years ago.
Yes.
If we were talking, we can't talk about it right now because it's too real. It's too immediate. There's real people involved, but we can talk about it if it's people that died, 800 years ago.
It's safely in the past, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, instead of being a thing that, and the past becomes this object that you're just reflecting on. It's just a thing you're interested in. You just think it's cool, and it doesn't really have any claim on you or purchase on the present. But the whole point of black metal is that the past has a claim on us. And to make this music, you have to let it speak into the present. And I think Auld Ridge does that brilliantly on this record. This one's a masterpiece, and we love it.